I took inspiration from a Paul Graham quote from one of his essays, and he always recommends to companies, hey, the hardest thing to get is customer energy, getting customers to love your product and what you build. Get that first, because if you don't have that, then it doesn't matter how much something costs or how much you're paying for or what the margins are. Get that energy first and then go into cost optimization mode.
Welcome to Building with AI, a show where we host conversations with world-class business leaders to uncover tactical advice that helps you build and scale better AI products. I'm your host, Haroon Choudery. Today, I have the pleasure of being here with Greg Kamradt, an AI educator with a passion for LLMs and business productivity. During our discussion, Greg provides valuable insights into the challenges faced in the early days of generative AI and the significant awareness gap between AI enthusiasts and mainstream business users. Greg also shares valuable lessons from his consulting experiences and highlights the crucial concept of building a product that customers truly value before focusing on cost optimization and much more. Before we dig in, here's a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Autoblocks, the AI optimization platform product teams use to create world-class AI experiences. So, you just launched V0 of your AI feature or product. What's next? Autoblocks unlocks an intuitive yet powerful optimization workflow that helps you continuously understand, improve, differentiate your AI-powered products. Understand how your users interact with your product by connecting user activity to what's happening under the hood of your application. Improve your product thoughtfully and iteratively. Integrate testing of your AI products into your CI workflow and run A/B tests to see what changes are driving great user outcomes. Differentiate your AI products with powerful fine-tuning workflow that lets you turn product usage data into training data. Get started with Autoblocks for free at autoblocks.ai. Now, back to the episode. Greg, welcome to the show.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.
Super excited to dig in. So to start, can you give an intro of yourself and what you do to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Greg Kamradt, and I've been an AI educator helping a lot of developers figure out how the heck do language models work and how are we going to use them. The emphasis that I like to give is on business productivity, or like doing things in the business workplace. So a lot of the application side.
Awesome. I stumbled across some of your content, I think during the early days of when you started creating content around like Langchain, I believe was some of the original stuff that you were putting out, and found it really interesting. It's a fairly nascent space, this recent explosion in interest in generative AI. We could probably just backdate it to about a year ago is when it really started exploding in popularity. And I think that's right around the time when you started creating content as well. Does that sort of timeline align?
Yeah, I would say that my interest started to peak right towards the end of when DaVinci 3 was coming out. So I hadn't seen too much when the GPT-1 or GPT-2, all that was going on. But the seconds I got my hand on DaVinci 3, I had a task that I was using data labelers for, like overseas data labelers, to do some activity for me. And I tried that task out with DaVinci 3 and it did it. And I thought to myself, holy moly, this is so cool. And then all of a sudden ChatGPT comes out and you get an increased an explosion of like the amount of things you can do with it. And then GPT-4 comes out. And I just thought to myself, wow, we've really crossed the bar when you can start to do actually useful things with these language models. Whereas beforehand, it was tough to do.
Yeah, and I saw you're recently tweeting about GPT-4 Vision, which we can get into a little bit later on, but a lot of very interesting and exciting developments over the past year. It seemed like the space is moving at breakneck speeds, and I'm sure been very exciting for you as well, just being at the heart of it and covering the latest sort of changes and developments. What's been the most exciting sort of piece of the past year for you? Was it the beginning, like the initial release of ChatGPT and how that sort of took the world by storm? Was it a later development?
I would say that what blows my mind is how much of the innovation and development is happening right now that is non-technical. And when I say non-technical, relatively non-technical. There's a lot of really interesting advancements that are happening just off of prompts and prompt engineering. So I don't know if you saw this Salesforce chain of density summarization kind of paper that came out. Well, that was a really big deal. So I think it's been really cool to see how many more people can participate in applying these language models to unique use cases and then also doing innovation on top of it. It's been really fun to see for me.
Yeah, I definitely want to chat a little bit about the chain of density paper from Salesforce a little bit later on. What did you realize during the early days when this latest wave was taking off? What sort of questions did you see popping up most often? What's been the sort of sequence and development of those questions over time from what you've seen? And we can think about it maybe in terms of like maturity and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I'll caveat with this is that on Twitter and generally people you talk to, we're in such a bubble. If you surround yourself with people in the AI world, there is an immense amount of knowledge and advanced knowledge that is going around. People way smarter than me doing some really awesome things. However, if you look at 99% of the business out there else in the world, they're not at that same level. And so there's a huge awareness gap. And when I say awareness gap, there's high awareness. Everyone knows OpenAI and everyone knows what language models are. But in terms of how to apply them in their business, there's a lot less people that are doing that. Now, the evolution that I saw back in early 2023, it was pretty novel to connect one of your external data sources to a language model, because a lot of the interesting things that had happened up until that point were basically just one-way interactions with ChatGPT. You go to chatgpt.com, type in, I need a present for my brother, here's some things about him. And everything you could do was just based off of what you could type within the app itself. However, now there's phase one. And phase one is when you have external data being combined with this language model. And that's really when the reasoning capabilities of language models started to get highlighted. So I remember I did a tutorial video on how to connect your Google Drive to ChatGPT. And at the time, that was mind-blowing. And it was via Langchain, which was really cool. Langchain made it super easy to do it. But people were like, holy moly, to connect my Google Drive, to connect my Notion, my Dropbox, my email, all this interesting stuff, it started to become really powerful. And that's when my eyes started to open up even more. Because when you think about web interactions, when you think about your external data sources, when you think about making these models smarter in the first place, it's all about having context-aware knowledge. So I would say that was phase number one. And then everyone started to go really hot on agents, of course, which is when you have this thing that is like a multi-step approach to trying to solve an action. And we went through the peak hype cycle back when baby AGI and AutoGPT first came out. People were manic, nuts. People all over the place were wondering which jobs are going to get replaced first. And you had hints of that promise not being fulfilled back then. People would say it every now and then, but then it really started to happen. And people really started to doubt that these things could actually do useful things for us right now. So if that was phase two, I would say we've been in a rough, long phase three right now, which is a lot of the hype has died down, which is good because now actual tools, actual value is what you need in order to gain virality. It's not so much, look at this cool demo that could never stand in production. It's what can you build that has actual value? That's what's going to go viral.
Yeah, I like that framing of the three main phases. Now, just to sort of anchor on the power of generative AI and how folks should maybe think about those capabilities in their product, is there a framework that you use or a way that you think about generative AI and how it should be used, like where it should be leveraged and maybe also where it should not be leveraged?
Sure. So there's a lot there. I'll start with number one, which is language models. So I really like a tweet that Sam Whitmore had, and she mentioned that language models are just a novel building block for engineers to start to work with. And so it's a new way to do data transformations. That's a lot different of a way than saying it's this magic wand and you can do anything with it. Not quite yet. It transforms a piece of text into another piece of text. Now, that is a very reductive way to put it, but when you put it that way, it becomes a lot easier to see where am I going to put this into my workflows. Now, to your second question around how shouldn't people be using this? A lot of people will go and use ChatGPT as a database system of sorts. And so they'll ask it a factual answer to a question, like when was the Revolutionary War? Now, that is a very well-known question, and so it'd probably get the answer right. But the minute you ask it more nuanced details, that's when it's going to start to either make things up or have a hard time doing it. So I would say that if you're ever using a language model as a database to extract information from, you might be in a tough spot there. The recommended route when you do something like that is to use it as a reasoning engine and to do better retrieval, which means I'm going to go get text that likely has the right answer for what I need. And then I'm going to ask the language model for the last mile step of, hey, is the answer in this text that I just gave you? If so, what is the actual answer?
So in other words, you should do the homework before you give the context and the query to a language model, as opposed to having it do the research for you. Is that essentially what you're trying to say? Or
I would say yes. I would say that there's a huge concept of retrieval, which means if you have, let's just make up an example here. If you're a professor and you have 20 books of content that you've written, and let's just say it's about economics, you could ask the language model, what is the economic theory within this book? But it might say, hey, I don't know what that book is, right? The really interesting part here and where we're seeing this wave is that developers are architecting applications where you go and index those 20 books worth of information. And index just means you throw it in a database and you have it in such a way where you can do almost like a pre-step where you go to those 20 books, you find the likely spot that the information that you want is going to be. And instead of having 20 books, now you just have 2 pages of information. And you can give those 2 pages to the language model and say, what is the answer to my economics question here? It's likely in these 2 pages. Answer it for me.
that makes sense. And what are some of the common techniques for retrieval today? And is that developing over time?
Oh yeah, so there's a ton of development happening here. The very first one that everybody always knows is going to be what folks call top K similarity search, meaning what you're going to do is you're going to compare the topic that you want, say it's your economics question, you're going to compare that question to all those different documents and all those different books in those 20 books that you had. And you're just going to simply get the 5 most relevant documents or the most similar documents that come with it. That was the first way that people did retrieval. Now that works up until a limit, but the more complex the question, the more nuanced the question, the more information that you need, you're going to have to do more advanced retrieval techniques. Now, Langchain has a bunch of advanced retrieval techniques. Llama Index has a ton of advanced retrieval techniques that are getting pretty complicated at this point. And the world is evolving. Retrieval is absolutely one of those things you want to be investing in, and it helps your application run a bit more smoothly.
Now, when it comes to prompt refinement versus refining the retrieval engine, whatever that might be, how should organizations or individuals weigh what's going to give them more bang for their buck? Should they be doing both, or is there maybe a use case for focusing on one rather than the other?
It's tough because it's very situational dependent. It depends on what task the company's doing. However, you can change a prompt in a second with a couple word changes or like adding new things. So just purely due to iteration speed, I'm always going to suggest that people start by editing their prompt and seeing how it goes. Now, the naive way to edit your prompt is going to be just in a code editor, go and edit it and see what the result is, and then go eyeball it to see if it's better or see if you like it. However, that is very manual. It's not very scientific. And there's a lot of really cool observability tools out there that will show you the difference in answers based off of the versions of your prompts. Then you can go and check those out and see which one you like better. People are doing A/B testing of prompts. People are doing evaluation of these outputs to help you determine how to do that. So there's a lot of interesting ways to go from there. On the flip side, on the retrieval side, that's more hardcore code. Iteration time is going to be a little bit longer. It's a bit more expensive, but do think ultimately you're going to have a little bit more juice to squeeze on there and you're going to get more ROI eventually. The unfortunate part is it's just going to take a bit more of a bigger investment when you're first starting out.
Now, are you able to also do some of those things like A/B testing and faster iteration? I guess, are there ways of accomplishing some of those workflows on the retrieval side as well?
Sure, there are. It just gets a little bit more complicated because now instead of a simple text string that you're editing the prompt, now you're doing more backend. And there's just slower iteration times on there. So I'm sure that there's a lot of really cool tools, probably some Y Combinator startups that are thinking about this exact thing. I haven't heard of many yet, but I know it's a hot topic. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're out soon.
Interesting. How should companies think about using AI in their products? So you had some interesting tweets recently about mentioning to a company that the hardest thing is to get customer energy for the value you deliver. Yeah. Get that first, then go into cost optimization mode. So I'll let you explain that and then also just discuss generally how companies should think about deploying AI in their products.
Totally. Yeah, let's start with that tweet first. So I was on a consulting call with a business just a couple of days ago, and they had raised the question. They said, hey, Greg, GPT-4 is pretty expensive. I'm thinking about using a lesser model because it's cheaper. And this business was pre-PMF. So they had not yet made a product that their customers loved and really wanted. And I took inspiration from a Paul Graham quote from one of his essays, and he always recommends to companies, hey, the hardest thing to get is customer energy, getting customers to love your product and what you build. Get that first, because if you don't have that, then it doesn't matter how much something costs or how much you're paying for or what the margins are. Get that energy first and then go into cost optimization mode. And that's exactly what I told this guy, because yes, GPT-4 might be expensive today, but just remember a few months ago, GPT 3.5 had like 10x or a 15x cost reduction. And that was overnight. That was just a surprise gift that OpenAI gave everybody. So OpenAI Dev Day is coming up in November. Maybe they'll announce a GPT-4 price reduction. I have no idea, but I can guarantee because there's so many model providers, they're all going to be competing on cost. So they're going to be competing on intelligence, latency, and cost. And cost is an easy one to drive down because that's more of a hardware problem. And so is latency. The reasoning side and the intelligence side, that's a little bit more different because you need some actual research on that side. That's the explanation behind the tweet there. When you're a business and you want to be thinking about how to implement AI within your own products, the thing that I advise people when I do my consulting calls is don't go searching for new problems. And what I mean by that is everybody thinks because we have this shiny new tool, all these new magical problems are just out there waiting for us to go look at them and then go apply this to. It's almost like it's a shortcut. And that's not the way that it works. Your customer problems are the same exact customer problems that you've already had and that they've already had. The value is the same. They're all trying to do their jobs in a more efficient manner using your tool. So my advice to businesses is what user research have you done already? What are those feature sets and those problems that you have collected from those user research interviews? Okay, which ones were unsolvable before language models and which ones are now solvable, and the barrier to solving them is a lot lower because of language models. So I recently talked to Mike Knoop, co-founder and head of AI at Zapier, And he used the word revisit. Go and revisit all those problems that you pulled already from your customer research interviews and see if language models can help you solve one of those today. And that's always my first place to start, because too many people, they end up making what Paul Graham calls sitcom problems, where they sound good, but they don't actually work out in practice.
I love that. Very practical advice. So let's say a business has sat down, they've identified which features or which problems they were unable to solve before GenAI, they're now able to solve. What's the next step in terms of implementing some of those features and maybe testing some of those features before deploying them?
It's really just traditional product development, but now you have a little bit of a new tool set at your disposal. It's around educating your developers to making sure that they have the tools and the resources they need to go and build. Now, it's going to be different for every company on what tool stack they're comfortable with. They may want to build in-house. They may want to use their own model provider. They may want to use Langchain. There's a bajillion options they can go do. But I think having either a consultant or an agency or hiring somebody internal who can give advice about which direction and how to architect this internally, I think is really awesome and really powerful. And then the second piece is that there is much tighter symphony of work happening between PMs and developers. And what I mean by that is, again, because a lot of this stuff is non-technical, we're talking about prompts here. PMs can now help write prompts because they know the customers really well. They can help write prompts that then developers can go and use, because it's an interesting question. Who owns prompts at a company? Is it user research? Is it products? Is it the developers? It's a mix of them all. And so there's tools that are coming out there right now, like FreePlay, that help do the dance between PMs and developers, figuring out how should we make our prompts in the first place. And so I think that's another really interesting place to play around.
And what are some of the risks involved with implementing some of these AI technologies? Are there any?
Oh yeah, big time. So risk number one that people always talk about is going to be around data privacy. So which data are you passing to your model provider? Now, I think Harrison of Langchain, he said that when they look at the usage logs of which model people are using with Langsmith, because they get a little bit of telemetry there, he said like 95% of people are using OpenAI. Now, OpenAI says that they don't use your data other than like a 30-day retention window for security reasons. It's up to you to determine if that's enough for your company or not. A lot of folks, it's a non-starter, right? And so they'll be trying to spin up their own models. Now, I imagine this will become not a problem when Google and Amazon and Microsoft, like they've already done with Azure, when they make those models available in those cloud providers. Because if you already have those cloud providers and you already trust them, why is this any different? You're going to be treating it the same. The other thing that I would say too is a problem for businesses is around employee understanding about what to use these language models for and what not to use them for. Because an uneducated employee who doesn't know the ins and outs of prompt engineering, they may start to get more hallucinations from the model itself. Not only that, there's a big problem with employees just simply copying and pasting the output they get from a language model and going and using that in the workplace, thinking like, oh, nobody can tell that I just copied and pasted this. Yes, you can, because what you wrote lacks critical thought and it has that kind of smelly ChatGPT tone that everybody knows right now. So those are the two big places I would focus on for businesses.
And when you deploy some of these technologies into production, or maybe even right as you're about to do that, what are some of the intricacies of working with AI that should be accounted for that may not be the case with traditional code?
Some of the big problems, number one is latency. So these models still have quite a bit of lag to make an API call, and that's because inference takes time. Like generating the output for the user takes some time to do. So you need to think about how latency is going to affect you. Can't just put out a whole bunch of synchronous API calls and hope that it works. The second piece, that's a big deal that people don't talk about a ton, is the non-deterministic nature of these outputs of the language models. You'll get different results sometimes with the same exact input, even if you're using temperature equals 0. Now, this is such a big deal and it's such a big problem that I imagine these model providers will work on fixing it and work on back engineering to make sure it doesn't happen. But that's still an issue, because just because your tests run today doesn't mean they're actually going to run tomorrow, as the model may update with the provider that you're working with. You need to have really good monitoring on top of how your outputs are going. You need to have great observability, and you need to be actually monitoring and watching this. The other thing I would say is that the eyeball test can't be your only line of defense. You need some automated observability at the same time. You do still need the eyeball test. Doing evals on top of language model output is still not at the level where we need it to be, and you're going to be working a little bit blind if you're not monitoring it with your eyeballs as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So let's go back to Langchain. That was part of the original discovery when I had discovered some of your content online. You were talking about Langchain. Obviously, it's taken the AI community by storm. It's become very much synonymous with this recent wave of developers that are using generative AI. What is Langchain? What is it used for? And who should use it?
So what is Langchain? I'll use Harrison's definition himself. Langchain is a framework to build context-aware reasoning applications. Now, context-aware means you're going to be connecting it to other data sources, not just text, but multimodal. And then reasoning applications, because all these language models, that's the direction that these things are going, is they'll be making reasoning decisions. They'll be helping you make decisions. And so they help build and architect applications that help you do that. So that's the definition. I'm sorry, I forgot the second question already.
Yeah, no worries. So the first question was, what is Langchain? Second question is, what is it used for? And then the third question is, who should use it?
Nice. So what is Langchain? Yep, context-aware reasoning applications. What is it used for? To build applications. So if you're using a language model, you're likely going to be using a Langchain type of orchestration software, which is very cool. And who should use it? Right now, it's still only accessible with code, and that's going to be Python or JavaScript. So if you know Python or JavaScript, you can go and totally use it. The other really cool thing, though, is that a lot of people who don't know how to code, they're going to ChatGPT and they're figuring out how to make their own Langchain applications, just copying and pasting what it says. Now, of course, it's a little risky because you're not sure what you're copying and pasting in there, but it's a way to first get started. There's been rumors that Langchain is going to be thinking about a no-code solution for themselves as well. And there's also other third-party no-code solutions that kind of hook into Langchain in the first place. And that's going to be more of a drag and drop type of interface. But there's a joke around no-code where if you want to build a really good no-code application, you end up coding anyway, even if you're dragging and dropping things. People have often asked, Greg, is it still worth it to learn how to code in the first place? And if you were to talk to somebody in March or April or May of this year, they would have said, no way, you're not going to need to know how to code anymore, blah, 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 blah. It's 100% still a very worthwhile skill to go invest in. And even if tools get so good where for entry level applications, you don't need to code anymore, the bar is just going to keep on rising. And to do all the cool stuff, you're going to need to learn how these things are architected a little bit more. And you're going to want to make more fine-tuned, nuanced changes to your code in order to get the functionality that you want out the other end. So that's a long way of saying go still learn how to code.
So you mentioned reasoning a few times. It's a term that's thrown around a lot in the industry. What exactly do you mean by reasoning in this context? And is there something else that we can compare it to just to have some juxtaposition when we're thinking about it?
Yeah, the example I like to give. Pretend I, Greg, say I'm cold and I'm talking to a language model and I say, hey, language model, I'm cold. To my right is the warm, sunny beach. To my left is the cold mountains. If I want to warm up, which way should I go? And the language model has a very good ability to tell me, Greg, you should go to the right, obviously, if you want to go get warm. So it just helped me make my decision there. And so it's like a conditional statement saying, what should I do? But it's based off of unstructured data and unstructured text. So that's a very simple example where it's just telling me to go left or right. But now say, for example, you're saying, I want to create a new file on my computer. Here are the commands that you have available to you. Let's just say there's 10 of them. And it finds the command in that list that it knows to use to generate a new file on your computer. Shoot, now R just reasoned about which command do I need to use, and then it went and used it. So when I say reasoning ability, I usually mean that you present it with a list of options, sometimes not, sometimes it's unstructured, but you ask the language model, what should I do in this case? Now, those are very simple left or right questions, but once you start getting into the agent world, then it gets pretty complicated. And you have multiple entities talking to each other with multiple options. It gets wild.
Got it. That makes sense. And in the context of building product, is every use case that a company might be using a foundation model for a reasoning task as well? For example, are there specific tasks that they may have those foundation models work on, not reasoning tasks? Like is text generation, for example, a reasoning task as well?
This is where the lines blur, and it's not necessarily black and white. When I think of reasoning, I think of when you're asking the language model to help you make a decision. That's reasoning. Now, but you can do a whole lot of other things with the language model that aren't included in that. One example is extraction. So I did this one pet project where I gave it a job description, and I said, please extract all third-party tools that you find within this job description, and it's able to pull those out for me. So could you call that extraction? Yes. Could you say it reasoned about the document and pulled out? Sure, but that's not quite what I mean there. The other piece that I like a lot too is like summarization, easy one, reducing the amount of information in a piece of text. Is that reasoning? I'm sure you can have a philosophical debate about it, but either way, no, there's plenty of other categories of things to do that don't include that.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, it's a nascent industry. And so I think there's definitely a lot of blurry lines around some of the terminology. And it's always helpful when we have a common sort of vocabulary when we're talking about some of these things.
You know, it totally is. And the interesting part is that a lot of the big players out there, they didn't align a set of vocabulary yet either. For example, even the concept of agent, don't like the word agent. They use another word. Some people call agents, others call tools and connections to other systems. You're right. There's not an aligned vocabulary out there. I see that as just a function of the immaturity of the market right now. Give it another 6 to 12 months and we'll get there.
So you shared on your YouTube channel that you chatted with a bunch of companies who had AI committees focused on just thinking about how AI can be leveraged in their businesses. I've talked to a few founder friends who are mentioning that in their board meetings, AI is a central topic this year. What are some of the findings from those conversations that you had?
Every company is different, and there's no one solution for everybody. Just because AI is coming out doesn't mean you need to go use it. People think that it is a shiny new toy that they go looking for a problem for. Let's say you did find out that you want to use it. Well, then it's just like any other program within your company. Leadership support needs to start, champions within your organization, have small, quick wins to show that, yes, this can work. And you also need to have employee enablement to make sure that they have the right training on use this stuff in the first place. Not only the right training, but also the right tools as well. My emphasis for business leaders is usually just, this is a program like anything else. Culture problem, it's a people education problem, but also a tool and technology problem too. It's really worth it to go tackle this from a bunch of different areas.
And what does it take for the organization that's adopting AI into their product to succeed that's any different than what it took them to succeed prior to their adoption of AI?
I have the same recommendation that I did for the product development side, which is your business has the same problems it had beforehand. You same blockers that you had beforehand. So have you written those down? If not, go do that. We have that list. Which one of these could you have not solved beforehand? When you take a look at the capabilities of a language model, which one of these are on the table now to go and solve? To revisit that list, you get a lot better of an idea about how you should go about doing this. But the place that I've seen companies start with CEO support, top-down leadership decision. Second piece, they do employee enablement. So with education and tools. Think about where should a company invest internally about how to use AI? There's the tops-down method when a CEO or leadership tells their employees about how they want to show the AI programs within their company. I'm a fan of the bottoms-up method, which is much more of the collective intelligence way of these employees, which is give them the tools, make them inspired, and then come up with the cool use cases that are going to help them do their jobs better than anybody else, and then come up with recommendations for it. Now, once you have those recommendations, then it's your job to promote some of the best ones that you think a company will have more adoption with.
Have you seen examples of organizations that are very advanced when it comes to their adoption of AI, both internally and on the product facing side?
Yeah. You're making me think of my old data science and data engineering days. There's the data maturity model or data science maturity model within a company. And there's different phases for how data driven and data adoption-esque your company is. I haven't yet seen that for the AI space. I think that'd probably be an interesting framework to work on and to go publish on and to see if other folks agree. So the one company that I love that does this, Mike Knoop of Zapier. So the amazing thing is Mike Knoop, a year ago, maybe even more at this point, he gave up his exec title to go all in on AI at Zapier. So I think he was head of products and he says, I'm going to hold this for now. I need to go all in and figure out what does AI mean for Zapier. Now they're a little bit of a special use case because Zapier is in the automation space and AI is extremely tightly coupled with automation. So they had to think about it from a product standpoint, but he's also doing high internal employee enablement with AI as well. So he's doing a lot of things right. He's doing measurement to see how often people are using AI within their companies. He's doing hack weeks, right? So giving employees space to go and figure out what they want to do with AI. He's doing good at promoting people. He's promoting these use cases within their company. So Zapier is doing an absolutely fabulous job. And if anybody wants to check out my interview with him, it's a 20 or 30-minute interview. Mike has some really cool things that he shares. In addition to that, he says 11 to 15 different ways that they're actually using AI internally today. And what I loved about them is he had revenue metrics tied to each one of the new ways that they're using AI. So one of them, for example, was a sales-driven one, how they were syncing data with HubSpot that made them more efficient. He said something along the lines of they're getting an extra 100K ARR per month just off this automation that they're doing within HubSpot and using Zapier, of course, as the backend with these language models. So there's real value to be had out there. And there's a lot of really cool companies who are pushing on it right now.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. Is that interview live?
Oh yeah, it's live. It's on YouTube. I love it. I reference it a whole bunch. Mike is an amazing person. And what I loved about him the most is that his intentionality with regards to internal adoption at Zapier. Now, he is head of AI. Not every company is going to have a head of AI at Zapier, but like he does. I think they're a great model to work after. And somebody needs to be thinking about this in your company. And it's rarely that the answer is that the CEO should be thinking about it because they have so much else on their plate. So they need to go get a person who's thinking about it, hire them, and get the enablement for their employees that they need.
I'm excited to check that interview out. That sounds really interesting. And I think a lot of folks will be interested to see what a good model of an organization that's adopting AI in a very healthy, productive way and data-driven way as well. I'm sure a lot of folks will find that helpful. So I saw on your Twitter that you're playing around with ChatGPT 4V is, I think, the name that they've given it. How's that experience been?
I mean, the easiest use case that I found so far is I used to have questions about my code that I would give GPT-4, and it would be very file structure dependent, right? But communicating a file structure to GPT-4, it's kind of a no process. It's like, oh, this folder's in here and this and that, or blah, blah, blah. Now I just take a little screenshot of what my files look like and I send it over and I include it with my text in GPT-4V and it picks it up right away. It's so much quicker than it used to. I was doing some pull request management and freaking get hula hooping all over the place. And I took a screenshot of what the problem I was facing and it got it right away. So there are amazing things that it's going to help us do. Many ones just like that are showing a ton of value with me already.
That's awesome. Anything else in the space that you're super excited about and checking out in terms of like tooling or technologies?
I know that GPT-4V is going to be a big deal, but I felt unprepared from a frameworks perspective to understand, well, is it actually going to get used? Because if I like to grok a topic, I'm one of the people that likes to see the 30,000 foot view, break it up into parts, and then go deep on each individual section. It's tough for me to go the other way around. In order to do that, I collected, I think it was 70 to 80 different examples of GPT-4V and how it was being used by some people doing some really cool stuff. And I put all the different use cases into 7 different buckets, how it was being used. And so that was what my tweet was around. And I mean, they're amazing. It's really everything from simply, hey, describe what's in this image to, can you help me problem solve what you see in this and what to do about it? There's some really cool stuff that's in there. Happy to go into each individual 7 if you want. But as I was doing that analysis, the things that stood out to me were, one, a lot of the demos were like the early ChatGPT demos where it looked cool and it looked right, but maybe it wasn't fully accurate like it should be. So we're still going to see the same cases of maybe reduced expectations once we realize that the model's not as great as we'd want it to be. Totally okay. These things will get better over time. The second thing that stood out to me was not yet open API access for GPT-4V. So there's not yet OpenAI, there's not yet GPT-4V API access for folks yet. So if people are going to be working with GPT-4V, it's all through ChatGPT, all through the browser. And it's very one way. So I showed a picture and I ask a question and then it gives me a response. It's very one shot. Okay, that's cool. But what does the world look like when you start to have iterations on top of that? And what I mean is, say you're looking at a map of your room and you're saying, I need help cleaning my room, GPT-4V, where should I start? It says, you should start by picking everything up off the ground. Okay, now this is what my room looks like after I did that. What should I do now? And then back and forth and back and forth. And then all of a sudden you're using GPT-4V kind of like mini brain and you're giving its response to its actions that it recommended for you, which is very cool. And if you think about how do humans interact with computers, well, text, voice, and sight, right? GPT-4V isn't yet working with voice. That's okay. It'll get there. But text and sight are the biggest places to start. And so it's still very early and the API access needs to come out. But I think we're going to see an additional explosion of use cases. I don't think it's going to be on the same order of magnitude that we saw with the text-based stuff, but it's going to be as many, if not a little less than just the amount that we saw before.
Yeah, and it's also going to open up a whole can of worms from a privacy security side as well, which I'm very interested to see how that plays out. With great power comes great responsibility, and I'm sure a lot of teams are going to be finding some very interesting use cases for it.
On that one, what way do you think that there'll be privacy concerns that we don't yet already have with the text-based stuff?
Yeah, I think there may be the unlocking of a lot of use cases that may require like a webcam or certain visual elements being captured by applications in order to augment whatever user experience that there is. So that's maybe an additional element that we didn't have to worry so much about with ChatGPT. I'm sure if the value very much outweighs the risk there and the risk is minimized to a point where it's fairly negligible, it shouldn't be a problem. But it's one of those things, if you're sending in footage from your webcam into a tool like this, and people will want to wonder where exactly is being done with the data.
I totally agree. I think that disclosing to your users how you're using their data and which tools you're sending their data to is extremely important. And it's going to be even more important as we move forward in the multimodal world of language models, for sure.
Totally agree. Any predictions for OpenAI Dev Day?
You know, McKay has a good tweet on all of his predictions that are on it. I would reference anybody to go check out that one. For me, I think we'll see a cost reduction. I don't think we'll see another model come out. And when I say model, I mean a more intelligent model like GPT-4.5 or GPT-5. My hunch is that we won't see it there. I'm hoping we see a latency reduction. If I could have anything on there, I would want API access for GPT-4. That's where I'd want to start. I'd want Langchain to provide me the ability to take a screenshot more easily within their app because they don't do that right now. I'm just going to go mess around and go try out a whole bunch of use cases for them. I would start there. Now, if I didn't get into Dev Day, unfortunately, which I applied, I tried to pull some strings, it didn't happen. Maybe one day, it's all good. But I decided to throw a watch party with somebody else too here in San Francisco. And so I'm going to be sending out the link on Twitter shortly, but we're going to kind of have a small private party of just a bunch of AI nerds and VCs figuring out like, what are they launching on Dev Day? And then we're going to have kind of like a reaction, like a fireside chat reaction group, get together and talk about all the cool stuff that they're coming out with.
We'll make sure to share the link to your get together as well. What's your hottest take in regards to AI?
You know, I don't know if it's my hottest, but it's controversial. A lot of people think that people are going to end up working less. So there's a lot of VCs out there and philosophers out there that say, you know what, we're only going to work 3-hour work days or 3-day work weeks once AI becomes big. I don't know if I believe that. I think that people find a way to fill up their time, and that because humans are generally status seekers, they will want to work 5 days a week, maximize the output that they can do. And so the other way I kind of think of this is, instead of reducing expenses, meaning you're only working less, I think people are going to try to increase their revenue. So they're going to work the same, but they're going to try to be more efficient with their time with AI tools. People say that universal basic income will become a thing. I have yet to see a signal of that actually working, and I don't think we're anywhere near it quite yet. Now, of course, I reserve all rights to be wrong after tomorrow, but what I mean is, of course, in the future, in 1,000 years in the future, who the heck knows? But for the immediate term, I would say at least for the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think UBI is coming around. I don't think people are going to be working less because of AI.
Awesome. You heard it here first. And I'm sure a lot of VCs will be very excited to be bucketed along with philosophers when you first mentioned that as well. So sometimes I think they're the same thing. But Greg, where can people find you?
Yeah, so the best place for me right now is going to be on Twitter. Just at Greg Kamradt is my handle there. I don't do a lot of LinkedIn, and I also put up a bunch of YouTube videos. There's a good spot there. But my anchor piece is really going to be around a newsletter. So I'll put a link for that. And the newsletter is the anchor point for everything. That's where I put my analysis, my interviews, all the distillation. It's kind of the real spot for me and my audience. And so I would encourage you to go there.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time, and very excited. Hopefully another conversation soon.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Greg.